Hi, Frank Bonkowski here today to talk about teaching English second language learners with dyslexia. Just like ADD, dyslexia is no longer a dirty word in the English language classroom. Educational professionals and ESL teachers like myself are beginning to realize that more students have reading and spelling problems than we think. And we as teachers shouldn't see dyslexia as a deficit. We shouldn't be making students feel bad because they have dyslexia. We need to show empathy, understanding, and good classroom technique. And in this presentation, I'm going to show that good teaching and learning techniques for dyslexic students are good practices for all second language learners. So what's on the agenda today? We're going to look at, let me get organized here, we're going to look at some of the, some background information about dyslexia. I will briefly define it, as you see, and I will also talk about some fallacies regarding dyslexia, about this disorder. And then I'll look at some of the, I'll talk about some of the reasons why English language learners have difficulty. They find it difficult to learn English. And then the gist of it, I'll jump into the gist of the presentation, which is about looking at some of the best teaching strategies to employ with learners who have dyslexia. And I'll have an opportunity to talk about my online writing course, Introduction to Academic Writing, which employs many of the effective teaching strategies in its multi-sensory approach, which I'll describe later. And then finally, I'll explain how easy it is to implement the writing course. Okay, so next, dyslexia. It's a neurological disorder. Language learners have a hard time consciously isolating and manipulating the sounds of the language and relating them to the written symbols. And in simple terms, dyslexic students read and write slower in English. They spell words as they sound, and they reverse letters and symbols. And they don't like reading, which is not helpful if you're a learner. And dyslexia can also be related to poor motor coordination, mental calculation, and personal organization. According to some research going back several years, up to 20% of the U.S. population may have dyslexia. And at my own college in Montreal, the Cégep de Saint-Laurent, over 10% of the students have been diagnosed with some variation, some degree of dyslexia. Pierre Dresdel is doing a great job diagnosing these problems. So what are some fallacies regarding dyslexia? Number one, the gorillas have dyslexia too. Let's pass on that one. Number two, there are more boys than girls with dyslexia, which is not true. It's pretty much across the sexes. A lot of reading practice can cure dyslexia. Not really, since it's a neurological disorder. It's not going to be cured with more reading or writing. Students with dyslexia here, the main problem is reading, and that's false because the problem can also be spelling, could be writing, memory issues, and even speed of processing. Students with dyslexia have lower IQs. Not true. Depends. I mean, they're just like anyone else, except they have this disorder. Next, students with dyslexia should sit in front of the class. Come up to the front, you, and sit in. No, not true. Don't target them and put them in the front of the class. Although my better students sit in front, and I do too, in classes. Dyslexia is not inherited. That's false. It is inherited, according to the experts. And all experts agree on the definition of it, which is not the case. I mean, in some of the research I did for this, there are different definitions of dyslexia, and I'll give you references at the end of this presentation. Number 9, asking dyslexic students surprise literacy tasks keeps them on their toes. Not a good idea. False. You don't want to give them even more anxiety than they already have, and that's another issue in many of my students, anxiety issues with young adults today. And it's best to place dyslexic students in low achieving groups. Not at all. That is not a good technique. Okay, let's move on to why students find English hard to learn. Any language, any second or foreign language is hard to learn. I know, I'm trying to learn Spanish. Oh my goodness. ¿Qué pasa? According to Margaret Human in her presentation, she talks about what's called deep alphabetic orthography, meaning that English has multiple mappings between letters and sounds. So in other words, spelling patterns are not regular. Spanish has a much closer relationship between spelling and sounds. It's not perfect, I know. Hola and Julian, there's not a perfect relationship. Words in English don't necessarily follow the sounds of the language. My wife is a native Spanish speaker, and this drives her crazy. And this is why she doesn't want to speak English. Oh my God, shouldn't say that. Another problem is that single letters can represent multiple sounds. So in the case of C, which can be pronounced as K, as in cup, or as in pencil, so we have this multiple sounds for the same letter, and then we have what I've called here weird morphological pronunciation issues with the suffix ed. Let's get back here. So as you know, as an English language teacher, this past tense morpheme can be pronounced, used on regular verbs, can be pronounced in 3 different ways, such as t, d, and id. So we have, for example, words like cooked and stopped with a T sound. And then we have washed and watched with a D sound. And then we have the wanted and divided with the id sounds. So why complicate my life? Well, that's English for you. Okay. Here's a great visual a graphic that Professor Martha Human put together in one of her presentations, and I share it with you here. And so the dyslexia-friendly classroom uses, for example, word processing technology, books on tape, so recorded text. It gets students to ability to show knowledge orally, get them to talk and show all knowledge orally, and particularly the multi-sensory activities is a great technique for both dyslexic and non-dyslexic students. Opportunities for positive transfer using cognates, for example, vocabulary building, motivation, and showing students the big picture, knowing the end point, where they're going, and have them take small steps to where they're going. Include plenty of reinforcement, recapitulation, positive feedback, build old learning on, or build new learning on old learning, and have a highly structured linear pattern, if possible, and used individualized measures and methods. Be sequential, cumulative, combine the visual and the auditory, and which is part of the multisensory approach, and also use different sensory channels, such as allowing students to hear and see how words are pronounced. That's very useful. And of course, the benefits to this approach are the 3 benefits. It's motivating. It gets students to want to learn. It's stimulating. It encourages learning. And it's effective. It increases students' chances for success. And so I want to say a few words about my writing course. As you can see here, the Introduction to Academic Writing course. In this slide, I just want to show you that it has a high quality design, it has a clear presentation, it's very user friendly, and there's a regular pattern to the lectures. And as you see, the numbers indicate the length of a lecture, a video. Each of the lectures is video recorded. One of my colleagues, Nick Walker at Ahuntsic College, commented he loves the design of the course. It's well designed, it's interactive, and it's multimedia rich. Thank you, Nick. In this presentation, here's an example of the multimedia, of the multisensory approach in the course that shows how the multimedia experience addresses different learning channels, different learning styles. So there's an informative graphic here showing what the lecture is about. In this case, an introduction to literary analysis. And there's also a talking head, yours truly, always in the sort of part of the screen to make the page a little bit more lively, I hope. And there's the actual text of the lecture at the bottom of the graphic. So students can follow. It shows the students they can follow the lecture either orally or visually, see the text. And I recommend that students open another screen, have a double page, and if they want, they can listen and read at the same time. And then, as you see on the left side of there's the left menu bar, which shows students where they exactly are in the course. And one of my students commented how useful it is in my trial of the course, how useful it is to combine both video and text. Many students really appreciated that feature. Okay, formative feedback, which is another good technique, as I mentioned before, in the dyslexic friendly classroom, where there's frequent formative feedback in the form of quizzes. The course has, after every module, there's a quiz, a self-corrected quiz, which can reinforce and review the knowledge of the lecture, of the lesson. And there are also self-assessments to check their knowledge. And this is very useful because it focuses on the objectives of the lesson, and students can see if they understand what they're supposed to understand. And again, another testimonial from a student of mine said that having access to the course all the time is perfect for my exams and homework. And she said she'll use it in the future. Thank you. It is available 24/7, and there's a lifetime access to the course, which is great. Do you have lifetime access to a course that also has updates? Not in your textbooks. So let me continue with some of the benefits to the Introduction to Academic Writing course, which I call the AWC. It makes it easier for students to follow a lecture with a combination of visual and auditory. It lets students work at their own pace. They can go home and use it at home. And then this is part of what's also called a flipped classroom, where students are given homework, prepare for the class, watch the lecture, read the lecture, come into class, and then I focus on important points that were made in that particular lecture and give students some practice, some writing practice, discussion practice. It builds writing skills. The course builds writing skills with lots of examples. And it gives students a sense of security because it's a highly structured approach. And some of the students commented that they liked the rhythm, the pattern of the course, because there weren't surprises. And then finally, it improves learning because of the frequent repetition and reinforcement. So how can you implement the course in the classroom? Well, I used it as a virtual, teachers can use it as a virtual teaching assistant to help them explain things and make a lecture available, again, 24/7. Students can use it as a self-paced course for self-paced learning to review material. And then an institution, college, university can use it in the library or a resource or help center and make it available to even a larger number of students with a license. I have available licenses. So that's pretty much it. If you want to find out more, I've consulted these sources. Joanna's book, Dyslexia in the Foreign Language Classroom, published in 2010, which I found online. And Margaret Pavy's book, out of the UK, the Dyslexia Friendly Toolkit, which is an excellent tool, which also I found online. And Martha Human's excellent slide deck presentation, which is found on SlideShare. So you see here very useful books if you want to find out more about teaching in the dyslexic friendly classroom. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to write to me, Frank, at frankbonkowski.com, and we'll see you again soon.